Welcome, everyone. I'm Pat Soldano. I'm president of Family Enterprise USA. The sole mission and purpose of Family Enterprise USA is to promote family businesses and their job growth in the United States. I'm very pleased to have with me today Mark Peters, who is the CEO of Butterball Farms, whose mission is to enrich lives and has been the best and brightest company to work for since 2015 to 2022. That's quite an accomplishment. It has been America's leading producer of margarine and butter products. It is recognized by numerous companies from EY to McDonald's for its leadership. Mark is an engaging speaker and storyteller who has addressed TEDx and other audiences, and he lives in Grand Rapids. So Mark and I became connected because he was kind enough to send me his book, The Source, which he's going to talk to you about today. And in it, he put a very kind note thanking me for the work that I'm doing with Family Enterprise USA. I was very pleased to get the book. I read it and I found it inspiring and fascinating. I think the whole concept behind The Source is fantastic. So I asked Mark if he would come on this webinar to explain the book, explain the concept and his vision. So Mark, I know you're going to start with a short PowerPoint, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, Pat, fantastic. Well, thank you for having me today. And it's a privilege to talk with other people that own family enterprises. And I really think that we have some advantages over other types of employers in our country. And so Pat asked me to share a little bit of my story and our family enterprise story and the path that led me to creating The Source and writing the book about The Source. So a little bit about me. I am an imperfect Christian. I'm a grateful father of a brilliant and articulate, authentic 16-year-old girl, and I've loved every stage of her life. I'm a second-generation family enterprise owner, actively changing our family narrative around that enterprise. I'm an author and a storyteller. I'm passionate, I'm curious. I love the water. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm happy to be here today and hope that after our time together, you'll be inspired to make some sort of change to impact the world in a positive way. So let me just give you a little bit of history. My dad was an inventor. That's what he would tell people. He said, I'm an inventor by trade. His first invention was the squeeze bag for margarine. And back when margarine was first developed, it had to be sold white by the law because the dairy lobbies in the 1920s, 1930s were very strong. So this cheap alternative to butter was sold white, kind of looked like Crisco shortening. And once at home, people would add food coloring to it and serve it yellow so it looked like butter. But this process left their fingers stained yellow. Well, one day, a couple of my sisters were playing with a balloon, which was kind of a novel invention at the time. And my dad was watching them and he got an idea. He thought, what if I put margarine in that balloon and add some food coloring to it? Well, that was the seed that turned into what became the squeeze bag for margarine. And ultimately, was a product that was distributed across the entire United States before the laws started changing, allowing margarine to be sold yellow. And once that happened, the package was obsolete. His next major invention that he participated in or development was the Butterball turkey. And he was involved in the development of that, and he owned some of the intellectual property around it. He was never actually involved in a production of the Butterball turkey. But he licensed the IP to Swift & Company for a number of years and then ultimately sold it in the 60s when he needed some additional capital for the business that I have the privilege of running today. And part of that deal is he licensed the name Butterball back from Swift & Company, and he paid it through the year 2099. So I'm not anticipating having to worry about renewing that agreement with Swift, but well, it's not even Swift anymore, but somebody's going to have to. His third significant invention was making embossed butter in a mechanized way. My father was intrigued with the intricate designs on the Whitman's sampler chocolate pack. And there's a picture of it there, and you can see the guy with the Whitman's box tucked under his arm. The problem with butter that you don't have with things like chocolate and soap is that it expands in a mold, sort of like water does, instead of shrinks away from that mold. So extracting it is a bit of an issue. And that was the problem that he solved in a manufacturing setting, so he could do it at scale. And so that was the beginning of our niche value-added butter business. And the story of how I started working for my dad is interesting. And as I've learned in talking to family business groups over the years, not particularly unique. But so when I finished 7th grade, my dad said to me, "No more summers at the family cottage for you. It's time to go to work." I was 12 years old. My dad gave me the option of working in his yard at our house or at the factory. Well, I thought I was pretty smart, so I decided to stay at home and work in the yard. But within 3 days, my allergies, I was a fairly severe allergy sufferer as a kid, made it imperative that I ended up working in the temperature controlled and air filtered environment of a food plant. On my first day, my dad got all of his supervisors around his desk, which was in the center of his office. And he explained to them that I was his son. And if I did anything wrong, to fire me, not to come talk to him, just fire me. Now, as an adult of a 16-year-old, I have a hard time imagining having that conversation. But then, as a 12-year-old who grew up with a father who never bluffed, it left quite an impression. Consequently, I worked very hard to make a lot of friends within the organization, figuring I was eventually going to screw something up, and was hoping they didn't fire me. Needless to say, my dad was not a warm and fuzzy management guru. He didn't run a people-centric organization. And there are a lot of stories I could tell around that. And a number of them are in the book. So if you get a chance to take a look at the book, The Source, I do share some of those stories. But working and growing up with my dad also did teach me a lot of great things. One of them was discipline. My father was a tireless and productive individual, and he took his work very seriously. I learned that details matter. He wrote his own patents and his trademarks, and the way our manufacturing plant was run, the devil was always in the details, and so were the opportunities. And skin in the game. My dad may have gone to extremes here, but everything he did, he always had some skin in the game. He always took some risk, and he was all in. In 1995, my father passed away, and I inherited the business. Some of that story and the family dynamics are also in the book. But I was determined to run an organization that was different than my father ran, and to take some of those other key learnings with me. And again, some of that change in culture and all the rest of it is really, again, in the book, which is about the founding of the Source. But I never started out intending to write a book. I started out intending to find a way to get more resources in the hands of the people who work for our company. And I wanted to do this because I'd come to the realization that most people didn't come to work late or miss work because they were lazy or disinterested, but because there were complexities in their lives that forced them to prioritize work differently than many of the people who may be on this call today. So these are some of the examples. I'm not gonna try to read them. They're just gonna come up on the presentation. And I realized pretty early on that one small business was not gonna be able to do what I hoped to do. In the book, I talk about some of the things we were experiencing in our workforce back in the late 90s. It actually does not feel that much different today. minus the pandemic effect. I remember meeting Fred Keller of Cascade Engineering. They're a plastics injection company here in West Michigan, fairly large company, certainly compared to ours, and hearing about all the things that he was doing within their company. And I thought they were fantastic. And I wanted to replicate what they were doing, but we were significantly smaller and had far fewer resources from a money, time, and talent perspective. So one day, I was on the roof of our building, which I oddly used to go up to fairly frequently when I needed to think. And I was looking around our neighborhood. And I realized there were literally 20 different businesses within a half a mile of ours. And I wondered if they had some of the same issues that we had. So I went and talked with them. And guess what they did? So I started talking with Fred and basically pondered the idea of getting a group of employers together to attempt to do what he had done at Cascade across that group. He helped me convene 16 business owners, mostly manufacturers. He did his triple bottom line presentation. Then I floated this idea past the group. I asked them each for $500 a month to see if this would work. One of the guys came up, raised his hand and said, how did you come up with that number? It doesn't seem fair. He only had 25 employees and he said, hey, Bob here's got 700. And I responded saying, I knew every person in a room was used to taking a few risks and each person could afford $500 a month for 12 months to test it. Well, I only got 8 companies to sign up. But with that and $48,000 of matching funds from the Grand Rapids Community Foundation, we launched the source in 2023. Today, actually next year, we're going to be celebrating our 20th anniversary. But today, the source has 23 member companies and covers over 9,300 employees. And I like to say that they serve at the intersection between our business or people's place of employment and all the needs people have in their lives. Now, I said at the beginning that I did not start out to write a book. I have a few friends and mentors in my life, as I'm sure many of you do. And I have one that likes to play the protagonist role. Greg is one of these guys. He suggested to me years ago that I should do some public speaking. He did this primarily because I test extreme introvert. And then he said, it doesn't actually count unless I get paid for it. So I did that and I got paid and I went back and I said, I did it. And he's like, oh, that's good. He goes, now you should write a book. And I just laughed at him at that point. Fast forward a couple more years, we're having dinner. I'm telling him about the source and some of the successes that we've had. And he just looks at me and he goes, I think that's your book. And I'm like, wait a minute. I actually could write a book on the source. So that's what I ended up doing. I began a 2.5-year journey to write this book. It's not a long book, but it tries to solve sort of a threefold problem. One is turnover that we experience in our businesses. And really the goal is how do we get a higher level of retention and engagement? The other is a lot of people that come to work for us have complex and unstable lives. And then the other is a lot of us have a desire to have impact on the community. So as we engage in these efforts, we actually end up having a really positive impact on the community through the lives of the individuals that come to work for us. So in my opinion, our family businesses, our family enterprises play a unique role in the system in this country. Many of us know our people on a different level than some of our larger publicly held competitors. We're in business because we're good at our craft. We created a great product. We have proprietary technologies, but I believe that our enterprises give us a platform to help make systemic changes. And we do that by starting with our own behaviors in our own organizations. You've all seen graphs and reports and charts about the number of people living in poverty. 40% of the population lives under the Alice threshold, on and on. And so what do you do about that? And sometimes we tend to think, well, who is that 40%? And if you step back and start to think about it, we all know those people. They may be our kids' teachers, the people that check us out at the grocery store, the people that take care of our pets. They're everywhere in our lives. We just don't connect them with the statistics. And maybe, why don't we? Maybe we feel a little powerless. We donate to organizations, we serve on boards, we pay fair wages, we mentor people. But often we miss this opportunity that we have right in our own hands, and that is to engage our organizations around the kind of impact that we want to see in the world. So because we have those jobs, we can connect with people around their income. And at this intersection, we're best positioned to change outcomes by offering stabilizing benefits so that people will stay at work and be able to work through some of those complexities. And ultimately, those efforts will benefit our business, our people, and our communities. So I'm going to stop with just two quotes here. One of them is, we will have more impact on system outcomes if we start with the behaviors we can change within our own enterprises. And the second, we have more impact with the influence of our entire enterprise than we do with 10% of our profits. And Pat, I hope now that I left enough time to have some conversation, because I find that that's the gold in these things. So hopefully I've given everybody that's on this call enough information to maybe ask some questions.
Yeah, so Mark, I want to start because I have a lot of questions. I want to make sure people understand the source. And what's in the book is that your dad had a 400% turnover when he was running the business. Yeah. And you got that down to a 10% employee turnover. And right. The source was the major reason for that. And what the source does is so important. And I think you should get into more detail about that. It provides a function that the HR department can't provide and that the community can't necessarily provide. So give us a real life example of what the source does.
Sure. And I know Carrie from my office is on, and do you have that source slide? Maybe you can just put that one up on the screen, because that would be helpful. And while she's doing that, yeah. So I'll give you a really super quick example that I just heard of. Do you have the other graphic, Carrie, the one where the source is in the middle? Yeah, that one. Perfect. Okay, so we were talking to some of the resource navigators. Those are the individuals in the source that actually help people solve problems in their lives. And one of the resource navigators was saying, yeah, we had they weren't from my company, but another member company came in, and they had a $50 medical bill. They didn't understand what it was, where it came from, should they pay it, shouldn't they pay it? And the navigator said, yeah, no, you need to pay this, and this is what it's for. And so anyway, they helped them figure out how they were going to pay that bill. But what the resource navigator said to me was, if we weren't here, that person likely would not have paid that bill. And if they had not paid that bill, it would have gone to collections, at which point it would have, harmed their credit. It would have made them ineligible for, rent or for housing, on certain applications. So it could have made it much more difficult for them to find a place to live. And so you realize just by those little things, those little interventions in people's lives, it allows them to continue to work, continue to earn a living, and continue to not live in a destabilized situation. And that's just one small example, and we literally have thousands of examples like that over the years. But
yeah, and I think as you talk about in the book, people don't come to work sometimes because the car broke down, right? Or their child is sick, or they're ill, or they can't solve for all of those things. And yet they're not necessarily going to go tell their supervisor or tell the HR department. And so that's where the navigator at the source walks them through that and helps them solve for those issues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, again, I think one of the things that we've learned over the years is it's sometimes they come in and they'll tell their supervisor, oh, my car broke down. What they won't tell them is, I have somebody in my household who's got a substance abuse problem, and I was up till 2 a.m. helping them, or because those are embarrassing. And so the other thing that navigator can do is peel back that symptom and find out maybe what the real problem is in somebody's life and help them solve for that while they stay at work. So again, the source is its own 501c3. Its board is made up of the HR people of the member companies, and their goal is to solve problems for people while keeping them at work. And I think that's really what makes it unique. A lot of nonprofits are very mission driven, and they're great at what they do, but they don't have a connection to the employer, and they don't have any way to communicate with the HR team at an employer in a confidential way that allows somebody to stay at work. And that's what we've been able to accomplish with the source.
So since you designed and built the source, other organizations have kind of copied this. Some of them are in big companies that have created it for their own company, or in other communities have created that. Something similar to the source. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Right. Yeah. We've what do they say? Imitation is the finest form of flattery, or something like that. I know that the Michigan Works system has say copied it. They've used the model to distribute services within the school system in West Michigan. They've also now sort of launched their own form of the source within their group of employers. There's another great national organization called Work-Life Partnership, and they sort of do source what I call source light, but they deploy navigators in there are 6 or 8 cities right now nationwide, and work with some large companies. One of the largest companies that they work with is Starbucks across the country. So they've had a great deal of success in taking this kind of approach. And if you think about it, you don't want your HR team to deal with all these problems in people's lives, because we're not a counseling center, and we're not a social service organization. And so people want to know what the cost is. So like for my company at 180 employees, it costs us right now about $45,000 a year. And I guarantee you, in today's market especially, I can't get a human resource rock star for $45,000 a year. So what this organization does for my employees and what we pay them for is incredible. In fact, our running ROI right now, return on investment from the source to its member companies, is about 230%. And again, I go into some of those calculations in the book. But
yeah, and I was going to ask you about that, because on this call are a lot of business owners, and so they're asking themselves, okay, I can see how this would totally change the lives of my employees and make their lives better, as well as the community better. And I'm going to feel a lot better about my own business. But what is a return on investment? How is that calculated into the profitability or the return on investment for the business.
Right. So yeah, very quickly, we all experience turnover at some level, and that turnover costs us something. What a lot of us are very bad at is actually measuring how much that costs us, like what's involved in the cost of continuing our recruitment efforts. What are the costs involved in our ongoing training efforts? What are the costs involved in, increased safety incidences and decreased productivity when we have, X number of new people in our organization all the time. So the biggest driver of that ROI calculation is an agreement around what retention looks like, because it's hard to measure what doesn't happen. So if the source interacts with an individual 3 times or more in a year, we consider it a job saved. And when we started the source, we used $3,200 as the cost of turnover. So 3 interactions or more with an individual was a $3,200 benefit to the company. And that sort of came out of the fact that many of us had a 3 strikes and you're out attendance policy. So that was where, and that's just an agreement that is still in place with the source member companies today.
Well, so this is the last question that we have time for. So I'm sure there's people on the call that are saying, this sounds like something I really need in my business. How do I find the source in my neighborhood? How do I find an organization that does this, or how do I create it? What would be your suggestion to them?
I'm assuming we're going to share some resources out in this, and so read the book. Of course, I would be remiss if I don't try to sell the book a little bit. We also can connect you to organizations that may be in your part of the country, and if not, if you're really interested in starting something like this, we've learned a lot in 20 years, and there's some great things going on in our country. The Chamber of Commerce Foundation has a program called TPM, which brings a lot of structure and discipline. I would say it's a little bit more enterprise focused in terms of internal processes. But if you add a people-centric component to it, I think it's a really powerful combination. And we'd certainly be happy to help or talk with anybody who's got some interest in doing this kind of thing, because ultimately my goal is to have especially family-owned, closely owned, privately held enterprises who already by their nature have a predisposition to doing this kind of thing for the people that work for them. I want to be as helpful as I can to sort of supercharge those efforts. So contacting us is a great place to start.
I also encourage people to get the book. It is fascinating. I think this concept is so unique and so important and accomplishes such great things. That's why I asked Mark to do this webinar. So I want to thank you, Mark, for being on the webinar today. I want to thank you for your vision in creating the source. And I want to thank everyone else that's participated in the webinar. So thanks again.
Thank you, Pat. It was a joy for me. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Everyone have a good day. Take care.
Thank you.